Let's jump right into it. So I had some time the other day to go back and look at Conor McGregor's last three fights. And I also spent time looking at the build up to those fights because I thought those all tell an interesting story on where his mind space was, what was going on in his life, and I think a lot of that played out in the fight. So first, I'm going to start out with Eddie Alvarez. Whenever he won the lightweight title and became champ. So if you look into what was going on before that fight, Conor was on a mission. He had just came from beating Jose Aldo to win the featherweight championship. He had the Nate Diaz fights that took a lot out of him and was a phenomenal point in his career. And it really made him and Nate Diaz even more bigger stars than they already were, especially Nate. But when you look at his historic rise at that time, he was just in a different place. He was super hungry, super motivated, and was just on top of his game, sharp as can be. At that time, probably the best striker in the UFC. So he was just on one at the time, and Eddie Alvarez just walked into a freight train. Conor was on it from the very beginning of the press conferences, calling him out, just all sorts of things. Because I think he was also frustrated that he didn't get to fight Rafael dos Santos, and he had to go through that Diaz saga. But going into that fight and just everything surrounding Conor, it was just a ton of momentum. And I think he performed the way that he performed because he had that momentum and he was just at the top of his game. And you also got to understand, too, that he was right on the cusp of being a father. We didn't find that out till afterwards. I know Eddie Alvarez alluded to it in one of their press conferences going into the buildup of the fight. But, coming after that fight, Conor talked about in the press conference that he was going to take some time off. So he was real motivated to set himself up and set up his family for a time that he was going to be out for a while. You got to think about it. He had a 9-month period where he was in the U.S. He never went back home to Ireland. That was tough on him. And going into that fight, he knew that life was probably going to change after that because he was a new dad and his level of stardom was already getting to a point to where it wasn't manageable based on how frustrated he was with doing the media. He had started expressing that a while ago before the Eddie Alvarez fight, but it really built up on him before that fight, and you can tell it was kind of like, you know what, I'm at the peak of my prime, I'm going to cap it off right, and that's how I'm going to do it. And I think it showed in that fight. Now, we switch gears to the Khabib Nurmagomedov fight. Completely different situation. So by this time, Conor has fought Floyd Mayweather in August of 2017 and made, some people estimated, up to $100 million against Floyd Mayweather. Completely different time in his life now. He's really he's really put himself in a different stratosphere as far as stardom with that fight. He was on ESPN every single day. He was all over every news cycle every single day whenever he matched up with Floyd. And it kind of put him above the UFC, to be honest, and every other fighter in the UFC. It's kind of like he's this megastar who, really doesn't jive with everybody else. So him coming back to fight Khabib was different because it was kind of like it's a new person, right? Like in their first press conference, I didn't even talk about the bus incident. Conor coming to the Barclays Center through the dolly through the bus. We've seen that 1,000 times. But even that press conference with Khabib, all the attacks that he thrown at Khabib's way with talking about his wife, talking about his religion, talking about his manager, Ali Abdelaziz, it was just so violent. It almost didn't feel like a sport at that time. I mean, fighting, I don't think fighting is a sport. Although I love the UFC, it's something deeper than sport to me, but that's just me. But it felt like it was beef beyond the sport to where you know, leading into that fight, you kind of fear for those guys' lives, especially, um, you know, how these guys travel internationally. They both travel a ton. Conor had talked about going to Russia and all that kind of thing. You just never know. And the thing about both Khabib and Conor is they have very, very loyal fan bases, and you just never know. So anyway, that's the lead up to that fight. And then you hear the rumors of Conor drinking a ton. He was drunk at the press conference. I think that much was obvious. And then they was talking about his lack of training and lack of preparation coming into that fight. And I don't think people were making excuses for him, but they were just, he did come out and say some stuff that I'm just like, hey, it don't really matter. Like, I didn't favor him in that fight anyway, just because it's an awful style matchup, but I do think a more locked in Conor would have put up a better fight. But you know, all of what happened during that time came out in the Octagon with Khabib. It came out in the Octagon. Conor returns at the very beginning of 2020, a year we all want to forget. But he returns 2020 to take on Donald Cowboy Cerrone, which many people thought it was kind of a tune-up fight. There's no reason to really fight him, so on and so forth. But look at the build-up to that fight. Conor had kind of became an elder statesman, to be honest. He was very respectful and not his normal self in terms of his trash talk and how he riles up a fight. He's took a situation where he's used to being this superstar who has all these millions and driving Bentleys and Lamborghinis and things like that. He's used to it. So I think he came into this fight kind of talking about the love he had for the game and talked about his preparation and talked about how switched on he's been. And he, you know, hired his nutritionist full time. He started just putting a lot of things together that really, you know, made it seem like, hey, Conor is back and he's taking this serious. You know, it's not about money. And he talked about giving the UFC a break on what they had to pay him. And he comes out and wins the fight in 40 seconds. He looked phenomenal for those 40 seconds, showed explosion, showed quickness, landed the shot, and closed the show. That's what we kind of expect from Conor McGregor, especially when he's going up against a Donald Cowboy Cerrone, who, let's be honest, he's over the hill. So that leads me into this fight with Dustin Poirier. All signs point to all signs point to Conor being on top of his game and being prepared and preparing very well and taking his nutrition serious and staying off the alcohol during camp and those things. That's what it seems like. That's everything you see on social media speaks to him being on top of his game. Hey guys, thank you all for watching. Make sure you smash that like button at the bottom and subscribe to my channel for more awesome content.